want to start by, Michael was saying that you are one of his personal heroes, and I think for many of us, you're a hero. You're a champion of the poor. And as a parent, I'm just wondering, so how do you raise a hero? So maybe hearing a little bit about your upbringing and how did that happen?
I thought you meant how did I raise Michael.
Well, that too.
I have no idea. I mean, I can tell you how I grew up in a large family, 8 people.
Yeah.
We lived mostly in Florida, although my parents were both from Western Massachusetts, and went south looking for work, really. That was one of those areas that had fallen on hard times in the early 20th century.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we got in our bus, as one does. Wait, I forgot to tell you that we lived in a bus after that. It was kind of a ruse. My father said it'll be temporary. But
and I think we have a
where
photo
did you get
here.
that?
Yeah, of the family living. So you, 5 children?
6.
6 kids, 5 siblings, growing up living in a school bus. This is before the tiny house movement, too, I'll say.
I'm not familiar with that movement, but I will tell you that the tiny bus movement was not so fun all the time.
Right.
But I also can make absolutely no claims of causality about, I mean, the 6 of us, I mean, one of my brothers was a professional wrestler on television for 10 years. So the same upbringing, different career choices.
Yeah.
I mean, every time he's been to Haiti with me, the Haitians look at us and say, same mother, same father?
Yeah, how did that happen?
He's the smaller of my brothers,
okay.
Who's an electrician.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't know how A leads to B. I know we had we were very fortunate, although we didn't understand it then, because we believe we lived in poverty and did by the most criteria. Not cultural poverty, not emotional poverty, not the kind of abusive insecurity that you've seen erupt in a place like Baltimore or Ferguson.
Yeah.
We were shielded from that.
Yeah.
And we just didn't know it until, we went back into the rest of the world.
Yeah. Well, you did not become a wrestler, and you're a physician. You also have a PhD in medical anthropology. So Paul, just speaking as a physician, though, you've saved countless lives, I would say in the tens of millions. But you've also sadly lost some. Maybe just speaking as a physician about one of the most memorable patients that you've worked with.
Well, the thing that you try to do in this, or a lot of clinicians try to do, and I'm so fortunate because, as you know, and it's partly your fault. Like, if you hadn't given us that money, and Larry and other people in this room hadn't given us money, we wouldn't have gone into Sierra Leone and Liberia, where we now have a couple thousand local staff.
Yeah.
Right? And so the stories that you want to remember are some of the ones that I just saw since you last interviewed me, as I was headed to Sierra Leone, I believe, that next day.
Yeah.
And there's stories like, I saw a number of pictures actually are from recent ones. I saw a couple from West Africa. And that little girl who was so emaciated after Ebola, of course we were wrong that we knew anything about Ebola when it began and when it was after. It's actually a disease that is intermittent, chronic. I mean, you're lucky if it's an acute illness for you. That little girl had just been discharged from an Ebola treatment unit, and because she had a negative blood test, and as soon as they were negative, move out. So she had to go to a hospital. She couldn't walk. She couldn't eat.
Because she was malnourished.
She was malnourished, anemic, and she lost her family members. So anyway, you want to remember those stories of people who got better, and one of the best parts of that story is the person who really helped her turn the corner was another Ebola survivor, a young man who'd probably never before Ebola done, child care or nursing activities. He saved her.
He took her on.
But, unfortunately, there's a lot of very difficult stories, and to be honest, they weigh on my mind more. Not as a
Right.
when I'm thinking of patients.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about the ones where we messed up, right? Now I'm usually thinking with elation and how lucky we are to do the work, but those
They stick with you.
they stick with you, and it's
Yeah.
always been the same story every time.
Yeah.
Whether
And-
you're in Rwanda, Malawi,
Yeah.
it's been not having the tools of the trade, the staff, the stuff,
Right.
the right space, and the systems to save lives.
Well, and it's been interesting just hearing the speakers this morning. I think every single one of our speakers mentioned growing inequality as one of the things that we're
Yeah.
all so concerned about in today's world. And you started Partners in Health to deal with health inequality. So, I mean, what do you see as the fix, or how do we take this on and fix our global health systems?
Yeah. Well, one of the things is, as has been noted by several of the speakers, to focus on equity,
Yeah.
right? Not as some polemic or ideological exercise, but to say, who's suffering the most? And meaning, look at the burden of disease, what is killing people, right? It's radically different, as you know, rural areas, cities, continent to continent. Sometimes it's radically similar. Mostly we don't know because we don't have the staff, stuff, space, and systems in settings like rural Haiti or Liberia or Sierra Leone. I mean, there was no way to identify the pathogen causing this explosive epidemic without proper labs.
Right.
Right?
And it's one of the reasons why it went undisclosed for so long.
It went undisclosed or undiagnosed for some months,
Yeah.
but that wasn't the worst delay.
Mm-hmm. So we're talking about Ebola and,
Right after I left you and got on that plane and you said, Paul,
I'm back.
don't get Ebola. And I said,
Yeah.
okay, deal. I kept my part of the bargain,
Yeah.
and Google did its part of the bargain.
Yeah.
But what we did not do and what did not happen after the war that I'm sure Mr. Rather covered, this is a vicious set of interlocking civil wars, Liberia,
Yeah.
Sierra Leone, and pulling in all the neighboring countries and the United States, the UK, et cetera. I mean, at one point, a quarter of the Nigerian army was in Sierra Leone, right? And so a terrible mess. And then afterwards, that hope that's been mentioned so many times, and that I feel every day, mind you. I mean,
Yeah.
even in dark circumstances,
Yeah.
this is very fun work,
Yeah.
right? But what should have happened then, when the crisis caravan and the humanitarian machinery arrived
Right.
after the war,
Right.
what should have happened then did not.
Right.
And in a way, you could argue that the peacekeepers did their job because they did end a war when no one else was able to for a decade, or they did help to end the war. But all the humanitarian money went into projects other than the things that have been mentioned as the most important investments here today. Education,
Yeah.
building local capacity, saving people's lives with an equity focus so that they are around to participate in the rebuilding of a new country.
Well, let's talk about that in terms of how do you do this global development work where you take on the urgent issue, the fact that we've got Ebola spreading at an alarming rate and you want to send resources and act quickly, but you also then want to also build for the long term and make sure you're making the kind of infrastructure changes that are going to last. And maybe talk through that in a situation such as Haiti, where I think a lot of even good-hearted people feel like, my goodness, billions went in, and what's happened?
Well, there's some nerdy terms, but since the room is full of
Pretty nerdy. Go ahead. Yeah.
easily diagnosed nerds, I will say that in public health, people talk about health system strengthening. It's of recent provenance, maybe 15 years ago, and quite inelegant, but we need it, right? Because you have an emergency. You have a transient spike in interest in, and I'm not just talking about health and major illness and injury. I'm talking about housing stability. There's a spike because, well, anyway, I actually hope that some of the worries about populism are not true for a personal reason. That is that Partners in Health has grown because people are generous and can connect to the suffering of others they'll never meet, all right? But health system strengthening has to be linked to response to emergencies. Now, we were in Haiti 20 years before the earthquake,
Yeah.
or more. I was certainly there longer. We had a network of people who could come together and try and save lives. What we didn't have was enough of the stuff and the safe space, obviously, to do our job well.
Mm-hmm.
That said, when you say, what about the billions that went to Haiti? We need to track, and we need to track pledges that are made in political conferences like UN headquarters or major cities where, groups of heads of state come to meet, or ministers of foreign affairs, whatever. I went to those meetings, and I hadn't really done it before, and I can't say that I loved it, but I could say that we tried to track where the pledges came from and where they were going. And President Clinton, who asked me to do this, I said, well, surely it's been done before after, because this always happens, this spike in compassion and fellow feeling. And he couldn't point to any example. So we started doing it. And I can tell you one thing, that billions did not actually go into Haiti. Pledge is not the same as is a disbursement. And then, of course, I'm usually not involved in that part of it, right?
Yeah.
Pledge, disbursement.
And then following up and following
delivery, right?
Following the evidence,
You have to follow the delivery evidence. Was this system built? Was this space built? The building, the hospital that we built with Michael and his colleagues, including Bruce, cost $4.3 million for a 150-bed hospital. That's under $50 a square foot, I think. Michael, tell me if I'm wrong.
Oh.
And we could do so much if we actually had the money and could control it. A lot of it didn't get there.
Okay. So funds
long
didn't
answer,
get there,
sorry.
and then we also see that there's not the same follow-up on evidence-based results like we see with the clinic and whatnot.
But Jacqueline, before I forget, having, Haiti, just like Michael's father's house in some ways, saved him, Haiti saved me. So I want to point out that it is not true that it is difficult to get things done in Haiti, right? For some intrinsic cultural reason, it's not true at all. Again, Google's partly at fault. After we received unsolicited donations after the earthquake, we had to make a decision. What should we do? We thought, what links education to direct care delivery and to generating new knowledge, the three things that academic doctors are supposed to do? And the answer is a teaching hospital. And tell me anywhere else in the world where you can build a 320-bed teaching hospital to California earthquake standards, fully solar powered, that employs 1,000 locals and is the largest trainer of Haitian doctors and nurses. That all happened already. It's already been open for 3 years.
Yeah,
so you can get stuff done.
I think part of the problem is the good stories and the good solutions that came out of crises such as the Haiti earthquake are not as popular to show sometimes. But just to push on that a little bit, you and I are leaving a little later today to head over to the UN for this whole week extravaganza. Are you a long-term optimist or pessimist?
Oh, I'm definitely an optimist.
About the UN and about the ability of...
well, if we didn't have the UN, we'd probably have to invent it, as was noted after, the League of Nations didn't work. And I'm not pointing to Mr. Rather because he was there, the League of Nations, but rather because he has followed these momentous events. So, in my field, in health, in care delivery particularly, we need standards that are set, right, and that we can follow. Like, what are essential medicines for a VA hospital system, right? What are essential now for Partners in Health? You can bet if you need it in the United States, you need it in rural Liberia, right? It's just there's no staff space systems at all. I was talking to the director of the president of the University of Liberia. He said, well, our medical school, this is last May, our medical school used to have 25 faculty. Harvard Medical School alone has 12,000 faculty. Okay, 5 of those 25 died of Ebola, and 5 left. Now you've got 15. So that's what I mean. If you want me to tell you a story that isn't yet happy, right? Then we have to go back to West Africa, because what failed after the wars, the chance to rebuild a national healthcare system, meaning for Liberians and Sierra Leoneans and Guineans, et cetera, that didn't really happen.
Yeah.
And now we're faced, so we could say, well, that's a bad story, but now we get another chance. But that window is closing rapidly because of inattention now that it is claimed that Ebola is gone. So we're stuck really in the same situation, but with fewer healthcare professionals.
Well, and as we've seen, with the fear around Ebola rising and then falling, and then we turn our attention away, I think attention is coming back now because we have Zika. And more recently, seeing
it's
Zika.
Never been a better time to be an infectious disease specialist.
So, I mean, how scared should we all be about Zika, and what do you see as the path that it's likely to take?
Well, Zika or any specific epidemic, as has been noted by Eric in his opening comments, humans determine the course of these events. There isn't what's called, rather quaintly in clinical medicine, a natural history of disease, right? Because just to give one example, if you'll forgive me, a clinical example, the closest relative of Ebola virus is a virus called Marburg, and it carries that name. We talked about this actually before, because it was discovered in 1967 in a German city. Why? Because they had the staff, space, and systems to discover a virus that was making their lab monkeys sick, right? And here we are. I mean, I've heard some wild numbers, like how many billions of dollars the United States put into responding to Ebola. And thank God we used that money when it was available, right? I'm glad we did. I'm proud we did. And certainly I'm proud of the doctors and nurses who volunteered, right?
The heroes on the front lines.
But we still, the goal, if the goal is only getting to zero, well, we already got to zero. Zero healthcare system, zero care delivery. I mean, I don't think there's a CT scanner working in Liberia right now. So, I mean, this is our oldest ally.
Even Liberia, a place with a fantastic leader like President Sirleaf.
Wait, I'm trying to talk about hope. And that sounded like a downer. But what I'm saying is, it is a clinical desert and a public health desert, but that's the thing about deserts when you water them.
Yeah.
I mean, it would, and in fact, I will say, like I did last time when we talked about that hospital in Haiti, we will change it from a clinical and public health desert. But we have to have staff, spaces, and they need to be Liberian.
So, Paul, what would you say to this audience? Two-part. One, what keeps you up at night that you think this influential audience should know about and have in mind? And then second part, what can we all do? I think we're all super inspired by the work that you're doing, Partners in Health is doing. What can we do to be part of the solution? And
I didn't mean to evade the question of Zika. Of course we should be worried about Zika, even if it didn't already afflict 500 people from New York. Americans, and I don't know if Governor Bush is still here, but the largest solidarity-based public health effort, or global health initiative is a better term for reasons I could go into but won't, has been the one that his brother proposed, President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, which transformed.
People might know it as PEPFAR.
PEPFAR. Transform, obviously the 14 million people are still alive because of it, or the kids who never got HIV, but it also helped sometimes, like in Rwanda, when it was used very prudently by local leaders, it helps build out health systems where there were.
It is one of the, I think, untold stories of the success of global health efforts, and
it's huge.
Led by Republicans to help bring AIDS treatment globally. So that gives you hope. What is something, as we finish here our conversation, what is something that for folks who are in this room thinking, how can I help? How can we do the most possible good for the cause of global health inequities?
Well, first of all, I mean, let it be noted that we've already received help from probably virtually everyone in this room, I would imagine. I mean, and I'm talking about direct material support. It's also unclear to me if our mission is noble, and that is linking a health system that's available to particularly the poor and vulnerable. I mean, we want it to be available to everyone,
Right.
but we're focused on the poor and vulnerable, right?
Right.
And that message, well, Google's helping us to spread it. This is fairly recent, collaborations. We've also had tons of support from the tech community, individuals in the tech community, and technical support in some very dangerous situations. So I hope there'll be a lot more of that. Like I said, these, I'm of course thinking of an EKG, as I'm sure you all are. These, but I'll stop. I'll move to another metaphor. These spikes of interest followed by disinterest are almost unbearable for people who believe in building health systems. When I say unbearable, I don't mean, despair, but I do mean frustration, right?
How can we take this surge of interest, surge of dollars that come when we have a scare like Ebola or a scare now like Zika, and turn that into a better system that's going to bring human
and fortunately there are some good but tough answers.
Yeah.
And one of them is we need to spend aid dollars wisely, which we don't, I mean, like I said, a pledge is one thing and a disbursement another.
Yeah. Delivery,
not high, and it's not good value for money, as people out here like to say in Scottsdale.
Well,
but I'm sorry, I just want to say that's something we can do with resources that already exist, which will lessen, frustrations, because people go to work, as was mentioned earlier, not wanting to do a bad job, or a teacher never goes to work not wanting to see her or his student fail.
Yeah.
So connecting these worlds in a non-post-truth manner, right? It does matter. If you have a tumor, as everybody here knows, tumor is rumor. Tissue is the issue. You have to have a lab to get a diagnosis, or otherwise it's just rumor. So truth does matter if you've got, what the answer is, and it takes investment,
Well, they say a crisis is a terrible thing to waste, so let's hope that we can translate this interest in things like Ebola and Zika into the kind of lasting diagnostics that we need to build that health system. So on behalf of Google, let's all thank Dr. Farmer for the work he does every day on the front lines.
Thank you.